In September of 1990, the Socialist Labor Party of America had a birthday party, roughly 100 years after the original Socialistic Labor Party, founded in 1877, reconstituted itself on a Marxist basis in 1890.
The transition from the old party to what we call the new party was part of a process. We've decided to celebrate the party's 100th anniversary at an affair that's going to be held on September 22nd. And that corresponds closely to a convention that was held in New York a few days after that, 100 years ago, September 25th. So it seems to me that the party goes through phases. It changes. It's not static. So that you have this earlier organization that really couldn't make up its mind who it was and what it was going to do. And you have the transition period, and you have an organization that emerges that understands the class struggle or accepts the class struggle, enters the political field declaring itself on the basis of the class struggle, but it hasn't resolved its relationship to the trade unions. It does that over another period of 4 or 5 years until it comes to the point where the Socialist Trade and Labor Alliance is concerned. And yet the party still goes through a process of evolution because it has yet to emerge, as it did in 1900, where it eliminated all the immediate demands from its program. And developed the Socialist Industrial Union program over the next 5 years or 6 years. So the party has been very dynamic. And the only really consistent thing that you can find is this adherence to the principle of the class struggle, its understanding and acceptance of the law of value, its understanding and acceptance of the idea that the working class must organize itself, must emancipate itself, and yet the party, while sticking, it's a beautiful thing, it adapts to the conditions as it finds them, as long as it's relevant to the circumstance of capitalism, and the class struggle will always be relevant as long as there's capitalism, and yet that consistency of principle runs all the way through the whole history.
The job of preparing an exhibit for the centennial celebration, which could adequately reflect the SLP's proud history, fell to a few volunteers. Much of the work of sifting through the party's archives, together with the preparation of those materials, was done in this small room at the party's national headquarters. What's it been like for you to be doing this work for the centennial celebration?
Well, I can tell you this. It's been a lot more demanding and a lot more time-consuming than I ever figured it was going to be. But it's been very gratifying on the other hand. For one thing, it's the kind of thing that renews your faith, renews your respect, and renews your feelings for the party when you see all the wonderful things that it has done. For another, it makes you feel good about yourself of being connected with it. So don't take my comments about it being time-consuming or difficult as a complaint, because it's had its gratifications, lots of them.
Have you turned up any real gems of historical or other interest during your work with the archives?
Well, I got a soft spot for every one of these gems. They're all gems to me as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, we've turned up some things that I found of special interest. For example, we found the original document that the Socialist Labor Party signed with the Socialistic Publishing Association to publish the Weekly People, and it's signed by Benjamin Gretsch, who was the national secretary when DeLeon joined the party. And, well, that's a real gem as far as I'm concerned. Everything you find that goes back before your period in the party becomes a gem, especially if it's something you didn't know, or something that confirms what you did know.
See the Wednesday night fight on ABC Television Network. Under Section 315 of the Communications Act, television stations are obligated to afford equal opportunity.
Among the things turned up during preparations for the centennial exhibit were kinescopes of television appearances by SLP candidates during the now bygone time when broadcasters were still making feeble attempts to live up to the equal time provision, or Section 315 of the Communications Act.
We of the Socialist Labor Party hold that we live in a period of history when another fundamental social change must be made if we are to continue on the road of progress. At this point, I would like you to bear with me while we go over a little of American history. Let's go back to, say, 150 years, when tools were simple and easily acquired. It was a time, too, when Americans were noted for their strong, independent spirit. They had an independent spirit because, for the most part, they owned their tools. This ownership and control of the means of life imparted a deep sense of self-reliance. Take the early 19th century blacksmith, for example. He started out as a blacksmith's helper working for someone else, but he didn't work for someone else long. As soon as he mastered the trade, he set out to go into business for himself. And he could do this because the blacksmith's tools, hammers, tongs, anvil, and forge, were easily acquired, and most of them he could make himself. The point is this: he owned his tools, he performed the work, all that he produced was his. But something happened in time that was profound and far-reaching. The simple hand tool gradually evolved into a huge, complicated machine. And this machine was too big and too expensive to be easily acquired. Gradually, the blacksmith shop of the early 19th century became the giant steel corporation of today. The modern blacksmith, the steel worker, cannot go to work today, learn his trade, then buy a steel corporation. The whole economic way of life has changed. The agricultural economy has given way to an industrial economy. But one thing didn't change. That was the principle of private property. The tool, now a gigantic industrial tool, is still privately owned. And private ownership still enables the owners, now the capitalist class, to appropriate the product. You will remember that the 19th century blacksmith was both owner and worker. The two functions were combined in one person. Not so today. Today, the owner does not work, and the people who do the work do not own. Having no tools of their own, they must come hat in hand to the owners of industry and sell their labor power as a commodity. Now note this. When the American workers lost possession of their tools, they lost something on which their forefathers placed great value. They lost their economic independence. Socialism aims to restore this independence and the spirit of reliance that goes with it by once again making the people who do the work the owners of their tools. Of course, the individual workers will not individually own their tools under socialism. You can't divide a big newspaper press, say, so that one worker owns a roller and the other a switch and so on. That would be impossible and ridiculous. The modern industrial tool is socially and collectively operated, so it will have to be socially and collectively owned. In short, the changes that have taken place in our social and property relations now call for corresponding changes in our society as a whole, including our governmental institutions. We must make a change from capitalism to socialism.
The Republican and Democratic parties are political Siamese twins. They look alike, talk alike, and act alike. And above all, both uphold and defend the capitalist system. The two-party system is a swindle. It offers the American people no real alternative at the ballot box. Only the Socialist Labor Party has a real and meaningful alternative, which we will soon explain. To make the swindle all the more deadly, the two major parties stand for the very things that obstruct and frustrate the hopes and aspirations of the great majority of the people who perform the useful labor of society, the working class. Most people yearn for economic security with freedom in a sane and peaceful world. But the two major parties, being defenders of capitalist interests, are in fact the political agents of a minority of the people, the capitalist class, an idle, privileged class that owns and controls the nation's industries, systems of transportation, communication, and so forth. In charge of the political government, federal, state, and local, the major party politicians function primarily to preserve and safeguard the property and institutions that enable the owning class to enjoy the lion's share of labor's product. It is the capitalists who foot the campaign expenses of major party candidates and pay the piper, and the capitalists call the tune. Most of the legislation that Congress and other legislative bodies grind out is of no interest to workers, to people whose income comes from wages. It is legislation that benefits this or that body of capitalists, or possibly the capitalists as a whole. True, there are times when Congress enacts a social reform, some measure that is supposed to ease the lot of the workers. But it does this, invariably to the accompaniment of loud self-praise, primarily to appease the workers, to divert them from radical thoughts and revolutionary ideas.
A moment ago I asked you what kind of a world you want. Now let me tell you what kind of a world you could have if you and the rest of the working class awoke to the revolutionary implications of the present crisis, repudiated the capitalist politicians, and got behind the program of the Socialist Labor Party. First of all, socialism means a world of economic security and plenty for all. This will follow because under socialism, all the means of production and distribution will be owned socially by all the people. Production will be carried on solely to satisfy human needs, not for sale and private profit as is the case today. The economy, therefore, will be freed from its dependence on a capitalist market, and depressions and unemployment will be forever eliminated. Instead of kicking workers out of their jobs, new machines and new techniques will kick hours out of our working days. And since there will be no parasitic ruling class to ride in luxurious idleness on the workers' backs, everyone who performs useful work will receive the full social value of his labor. Socialism will mean peace, too. Not just a period of nervous truce between wars, but blessed lasting peace. Disarmament under capitalism is a delusion, because no nation will demobilize its armies while the underlying economic cause of war remains. But socialism will put an end to capitalist exploitation, and therefore end the capitalist economic rivalry that leads to war. Socialism will create a sound cooperative economic foundation for real, lasting peace. Finally, socialism will mean freedom. Many people are being frightened away from the liberating principles of socialism by the lying claim that socialism exists in Russia. But as the Socialist Labor Party pointed out years ago, the masters of the Russian state have, in the name of Karl Marx, betrayed everything that Marx stood for, everything that true socialism stands for. They have used socialistic phrases to disguise a bureaucratic despotism that is in every sense the direct opposite of socialism. Socialism, Marxian socialism, as applied and developed by the great American socialist Daniel DeLeon, means a society in which the industries are managed democratically by the workers themselves through socialist industrial union councils. It means the abolition of the bureaucratic political state and the setting up of a government based directly on industry. The industrial union government advocated by the Socialist Labor Party is the only kind of government that can guarantee democracy and freedom in this industrial age. It is the only kind of government that can guarantee to the rank and file of the workers a democratic control over their tools and their products.
Now, note this. Instead of a Congress of politicians who talk, and who scheme endlessly in the interest of the ruling capitalist class, we will have an industrial Congress representing the useful occupations of the land. And this will be a useful, functioning Congress. Its duties will be those of administering overall production. It will be to industry what the orchestra leader is to the orchestra. That is, it will be an integral part of production. It will decide such questions as how much is producible, how much is needed, how many tons of coal, how many millions of pairs of shoes, how many television sets, and so forth. Now, perhaps we'll make mistakes. Perhaps we'll elect the wrong people. Well, if we do, we'll recall them and elect someone else. You see, when you have a society in which the workers have collective control of things, mistakes like this can be corrected, and no great harm is done. And that is what socialism is, a system in which democracy is a living, vibrant reality. Now the question is, how do we get it? The twofold tactics for building socialism in America are, one, the socialist ballot, two, backed up by a real working class union, a socialist industrial union. The ballot is the peaceful and the civilized method. And our right to reconstruct society any way we wish is the fundamental law of the land. It's embodied in Article 5 of the Constitution. The socialist industrial union of all the workers is necessary to back up the right of the ballot and to have the power and give us the power and means with which to take possession and hold and operate the industries in the interest of all the people.
The equal time provision under which these and other SLP candidates made radio and television appearances provided that broadcasters who got free use of the public airways for their private profit were to provide equal opportunities for all candidates for the same office who had qualified for a place on the ballot. But motivated by their own profit interests and the political interests of the capitalist class as a whole, the broadcasters fought the provision from the start.
In 1953, during the mayoralty campaign, and I was a candidate on the mayoralty ticket, and we had been after CBS demanding equal time, and we were being resisted on some technicality. The technicality is not important. We were sure we had a case. They were using everything they could to stall us around, and finally, apparently, after conferring with their legal department, they decided, well, the minority party should get their time. And so she called me up, the woman who was in charge, incidentally, Frank Stanton's assistant, who was the head of CBS News, called me up and said that they had discussed the problem and they had decided to give the minority candidates time. And since we were in the forefront, among the first who had demanded it, were really putting up the fight for it, we were going to have first shot. And I suppose, overwhelmed with victory, we snapped at it. And she said we were to get the time a week from the Sunday, and we were to have a half hour, and that gave us only 10 days in which to, less than 10 days to prepare the program, and we said we'll take it. And as soon as I hung up, I knew I had been had, because that Sunday, where she so graciously gave us the time, was the opening day of the World Series. I'll tell you, it was a good lesson. It never happened again. I can tell you that. I never went to the radio or TV stations after that with anything but my guard up. That program taught us that we really ought to be prepared for programs. And so we decided to start putting together a half-hour program. Obviously, as the kind of political the kind of art facilities we had rested in individual members. This party had no art department, it had no political campaign department, it had no advertising department, had none of the things that the political parties had. But we called on the people who were graphically capable in the party, the Steinhilbers, the Herders, and people like that. And Herder in particular on this occasion conceived an idea for working up a program that we loosely called the Case Against Capitalism, but which was actually in two parts, the Case Against Capitalism and the Case for Socialism. And he developed what we called the flannel board. We still have it around here somewhere. And he devised a system whereby he illustrated that talk with all kinds of graphic illustrations that were cutouts and on which he mounted another type of cloth that had a natural adherence to the flannel board. And it worked beautifully. We wrote a script to go with it, and incidentally, it was a script, the basis of which we changed many times, but basically we used that script over and over and over again, because it was one that we really worked on and worked out. And when we put it on for the first time at CBS, the engineers there were absolutely flabbergasted. They had never seen anything like it before, and I'm sure they've devised a million things that are far more miraculous since, but at that time it really took them, and they just couldn't get over the fact. I think it's the first time that when the program was over, that the whole staff and the audience applauded. And they were applauding that flannel board.
Broadcasters eventually pushed Congress to emasculate the equal time provision completely. But that's only a small part of the story of the difficulties encountered by the SLP in its 100-year struggle for socialism. Campaigns themselves were always very difficult.
Mr. Eric Haas, our candidate for president, is in the studio with us. He has just returned from a nationwide campaign tour. He didn't travel by private plane. He was not accompanied by any retinue of press agents, speechwriters, or politicians. No special reporters were assigned to him by the various news media. He visited many of the major industrial cities from coast to coast, where he addressed public meetings and spoke over local radio and television. We believe that after all the publicity that's been inflicted upon you about the major parties and their candidates, you will be interested in learning from Mr. Haas how a minority party puts up a fight in a national election.
A fight is a word, Mr. Herder. The fight starts long before the actual campaign. It begins with our efforts to get on the ballot in the various states. The Socialist Labor Party has never been permitted to present its program to the electorate of the nation unhampered and on an equal footing with the major parties. It has never been permitted to appear on the ballot in a national election in all the states. It has never received equal publicity. It has never received equal time on radio or television. There is little doubt that if the major parties were forced to conduct their campaigns under such undemocratic conditions, they would long ago have ceased to exist.
Why do you think the SLP has lasted so long?
Probably a lot of reasons. I don't know that I can pinpoint them all. I don't know that I can pinpoint them in any definite way. I think it has lasted primarily because it's got a program that fits the times. I think it's lasted because it attracts people with character and decency who really want to solve a problem. I think it has lasted because its principle appeals to thinking people. And as long as it does that, I think that's the proof that it is an organization that has a fundamental attraction to sound-thinking people and will last as long as sound-thinking people are around.
Well, I think it's lasted this long because it has a program that makes sense and because it has a purpose that still hasn't been fulfilled yet. It has a logical appeal, and what we're talking about, I think, once we get an opportunity to explain it to people, does make sense to them. The idea of people controlling their own means of production, people controlling their own product and receiving the full value of what they produce.
I think it's a testimony to the fact that the party fundamentally is right, and that a principle that is right is always going to find honest, sane, rational, intelligent people who are going to adhere to that principle and who are going to fight for that principle. The party is, as you say, as you point out, has had a great deal of difficulty over the years to contend with, some of it internal, some of it external. But I think it survived because it's relevant and it's correct.
I am proud of the unblemished record of this great working class party, a record that reaches back 66 years to the time the party was founded in 1890. I am proud of the party's working class dignity, too, and of its uncompromising adherence to scientific socialist principles. It is true, of course, that the Socialist Labor Party has not yet won a majority vote. We are, therefore, a minority party as of now. But it must be remembered that the major parties of today were the minority parties of yesterday. Although a minority party, the Socialist Labor Party has accomplished much. By its fighting spirit and socialist integrity, by its refusal to lower itself to the gutter of capitalist politics, by its insistence on treating voters as intelligent human beings capable of making intelligent decisions.
The Socialist Labor Party is the party of labor. It is the party of the working class. This is not so because the majority of workers support the Socialist Labor Party. Unfortunately, the majority of workers are still looking for a Moses to lead them out of the wilderness. Hence, they are still being roped in by capitalist politicians who pose as friends of labor. The reason that the Socialist Labor Party is truly the party of the working class is simply that through its program, and its program alone, the workers can build a world of peace, freedom, and plenty for all.
What are your feelings as the party approaches its centennial celebration?
You know, I've thought a lot about this in recent days. I guess when you get to the point where you're at what they call the retirement age, you begin to look back at a lot of the things you did and wonder, would you have done them again? I've often heard the phrase that the Socialist Labor Party, particularly with all the problems it has failed. And as I look around, I can only conclude that of all the things that have been tried, the Socialist Labor Party is the only one that hasn't failed. For a simple reason, it's never been tried, if no other reason. And by that I don't mean to say that there aren't things that we might have done better, that there aren't things that there aren't circumstances under which we may have lost an opportunity. I'm not talking about that. But if you look at every effort that's been made to solve any problem in the entire existence of the SLP, whether it be poverty, whether it be racism, whether it be war, there have been all kinds of solutions applied. There have been millions and millions of dollars spent. There have been thousands, tens of thousands, and millions of people gained in support of those programs. Everything has been tried, and where are we? We still have poverty, worse than ever. We still have wars, as great as ever. We still have racism, as bad as ever. All the evils that they've tried to cure, on which they concentrated, which they said had to be taken care of first before you could turn to revolution, are still here. So when I look back at what we've done, it isn't we who have failed. The American people have not listened. The American working class has not listened. For that matter, the Russian working class wouldn't listen either when we spoke to them. Or I should say, at least the Russian Bolsheviks wouldn't listen. The point is, the Socialist Labor Party is still here. Whether it is large or small is immaterial. It has not failed. It has remained true to its work, and I, for one, feel better every day for having belonged to it.
I think the first thing is a sense of pride that this is an organization that's stuck it out and put up with different kinds of persecution and all the slander that's been leveled at socialism, all the misunderstanding and negative propaganda that's been hurled at the socialist movement, and we've stuck through that. We've realized that this idea makes sense, that this is something worth fighting for, that this is the way we're going to have a sane society, and we've stuck with it and continue to exist, continue to recruit new people to our cause, and waiting until conditions are ripe for our time to come. And I take a great deal of pride in that, to belong to such an organization that has had the stick-to-itiveness to do that. And also look at the centennial as a time to kind of take stock in that achievement and to spend a few days celebrating it, which I think our work has entitled us to.
The SLP's rich history is in large measure the history of the class struggle in America. It is a history that spans the lives of thousands of workers who were members and sympathizers, all of whom contributed in some way to the party's collective experiences and accomplishments. The Socialist Labor Party and the workers who've marched through its ranks during the past century have built a revolutionary tradition that is worth celebrating, primarily because its program still represents the future and is therefore still worth fighting for.
The people's flag is deepest red, it shrouded off the martyred dead. And ere the limbs grew stiff and cold, their heart's blood died in every fold. Then raised the scarlet standard high, beneath its folds we'll live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here.
It waves above our infant nights when all our heads seem dark as night. It witnessed many a deed and vow, we mustn't change its colour now.
Raise the scarlet standard high, beneath its folds we'll live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. It well recalls the triumphs past, it gives the hope of peace at last. The banner bright, the symbol plain of human right and human gain. Raise the scarlet standard high, beneath its folds we'll live or die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here.
We certainly have not convinced the majority of the workers of this country of the need for socialism. They're paying a price for that. All we can do is keep up our work. Eventually, the circumstances, the social circumstances that make for revolution will come to a co-joining point. And when they do, if we've done our work well, the results will show it.